Hello, it's Derek Young in the clubhouse today. Do you hear me?
Yes, Jonathan Allen here, checking in live in full effect. Do you hear me?
All right. Dana Blake here, present in the clubhouse. Do you hear me?
Yes,
indeed.
Yes, we hear us. All right, so you all know that Leadership Brainer is all about supporting minoritized, underserved, underrepresented communities. We're about creating access. We're about amplifying voices. And so I'm so excited for this conversation here today, our first inaugural Do You Hear Me critical conversation. Yes. And so before we jump in, I would love, Jonathan, if you can share, what does Do You Hear Me mean?
Yes, well, do you hear me? First of all, my check. Do you hear me? So do you hear me really is one, an affirmation. So someone says something that you agree with, is, do you hear me? And then do you hear me is also an amplification. It's giving voice to the unheard, to the issues that go undiscussed. And so it is also, do you hear me? And we are really excited for this conversation and all conversations in which we aspire to provide people with a dose of hope, belonging, and action. And I would be remiss if we did not, before moving forward, thank one of our premier partners, State Street Corporation, for their investment and support of Leadership Brainer's life-changing mission and work. And so, State Street, do you hear me?
Absolutely. And so we are going to be starting our first conversation about mental health. It's really setting the tone for all the conversations going forward. Can we be doing anything with integrity and fidelity without just addressing where we're at every day? And so that's why we're so excited to be here with our special guest. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself. But these are some real game changers in the city of Boston, entrepreneurs doing things that 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe Boston wasn't even thinking about, and you're setting the standard, and we're just so grateful for having you here. So if you want to go ahead and start by introducing yourself.
Absolutely. Well, do you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm Dr. Charmaine Jackman. I'm a licensed psychologist and the founder of InnerPsych Inc., which is really focused on disrupting racial inequities in mental health. So we have a national factors of color directory, and we're actually moving into the space of really providing mental well-being services for corporations, really ensuring that employees of color have the resources and tools that they need to thrive. So that's what I have for now. Lots more to come.
Yes.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm Pilar Tucker. Do you hear me?
Yes.
I am a clinical psychology doctoral candidate at William James College. So I'm excited to be here as a partner with the Leadership Brainery. And I'm also a founder and CEO of Empower Our Crown, which is an organization, nonprofit organization that inspires and empowers mentally and emotionally competent world changers. So what we do is we develop programming to bridge that gap between mental health and wellness and leadership development. And so for me, I love to just inspire and empower from the heart, from my love and my joy, but also the clinical space that I'm able to be a part of, really, eradicating some of these systems and bringing our people to healing and joy, because we deserve.
Yes.
Do you hear me?
Do you hear me? I love it. We are on the roll already.
And just to get us started, we're just going to kind of start from the beginning. And I want to ask everyone, what was your first interaction with mental health? When did you realize? And it could have been at 20, it could have been at 2, where like, this is a thing where someone might not be in their best self. Maybe how do I help them show up? Or do I need to ask somebody for help to help them show up? So take as much time as you need. That first time.
That's a great question. I can kick it off. Of course, I feel like we've always experienced with our own individual mental health, right? We just probably didn't know how to identify it.
That's right.
When I was in grad school, I went to Tufts Medical School for my master's in public health. I had just transitioned from Louisiana, went to a HBCU, Grambling State, and I was the only Black man to enter into my cohort at Tufts Med that year. And it was really tough. And it was in that moment that I really felt like I feel different. I'm not as exciting and joyful as I used to be. The work is difficult, so that added on to it. And still, I didn't know exactly where to go. Should I get help? Should I go to a therapist? I didn't end up doing anything. I more so ended up talking to my professors and, of course, like my partner and my family. But I think that was like my first experience that I knew that mental health was a thing. There is something I need to do about it. I started doing a lot of research, but I ran into that issue of, first, where do I find someone of color that can help me? That was really difficult. Exactly. It's like if I would have been plugged in, then I would have known. Exactly. But that was one of the big pieces. I was just going through the list, and I can find anybody that looked like me, or I felt like they can identify with some of the characteristics. And so that was my first experience.
Thank you.
I'm happy to jump in. Mine was way earlier. So I remember, back then I didn't know what it was, but very young, I think I probably remember the first time someone really close died. And I had the day of the funeral, and it repeated a few more times. I would just have these panic attacks. I didn't have words for them, but I wouldn't be able to sleep. My parents would literally put me in the car and drive around until I fell asleep. But I had these significant panic attacks. I remember one time getting a pill from a doctor and it had a V on it. And later on, I'm like, oh, they give me Valium, right? So it's a way to calm down. But I would say my first real memory was one of my uncles, who's now deceased, had a significant substance abuse problem. And he actually lived with us for a little bit. Very intelligent man, but on the weekends, he would just get wicked drunk. And so I knew very early on, like, that wasn't healthy, that wasn't right. Again, not having words for it, nobody talked to me about what was going on, I had to make sense of all these things. So very early on, I knew I wanted to be a psychologist. I never met one. I remember having a sociology class, but I remember wanting to be an adult for kids, like wanted to be a trusted adult that kids can talk to about anything. So I didn't really have that growing up. The roles, I grew up in Barbados, so the roles are very hierarchical. They don't talk about your feelings, and feelings you have, they're negative, like they're not allowed. So very early on, I just noticed I wanted to be a space for that. So I think that was my first real awareness. We had one mental health hospital there, and I remember driving by and you'd see people talking to themselves. And so there's always a curiosity for me about what's going on with these people and wanting to know what's that and how it can help.
And look at you now.
I know.
I can definitely resonate with both of your stories, but I think the first time that I encountered mental health or really felt, a mental challenge was in high school. I had transitioned from a private school to a public high school, and I think I was going through an identity crisis. Body, developed some eating disorders, feeling like I was taking my anger out in different ways that, like, a teenager didn't really know how to articulate. I didn't know how to articulate at the time. And I remember my senior year of high school, I was in an AP psych course, and I just felt like I started to realize, like, there were some tools. There are tools to explain why you're acting this way. At the time, I was calling it crazy, but knowing now, that's far from the truth. It was, going through a lot of my own challenges at the time, and that my family didn't understand. My family, as you pray about it, you get through, or you're gonna be on punishment if you don't get through this, and so I just didn't know how to say what was wrong, but I had a lot of internal battles that I was suffering with. And I think that when I got to this class, I started to feel heard and seen. And then that for me was like a moment where I need to devote my life to psychology so people can hear themselves, can be seen and be heard and seen by others.
Yeah.
And so from that, like I went straight from, AP psych to major at Spelman at psych to BU psych to now William James psych. And like, so now I'm here, but it's been a journey. It's been a journey of trying to figure out, my why, what was going on with me then, and now really providing spaces and opportunities for other people to do that, because I know that it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Thank you.
So powerful.
And I appreciate the vulnerability, the transparency, and your story in particular, because that is my introduction, mental health in regards to addiction. As a young person growing up with it so side by side in my family, it took a long time for me to distinguish that was not normal. And once I was able to create that differentiation, I said, oh, this is your coping mechanism because everything else is wrong in the world.
Yeah.
And knowing, I also come from a Caribbean background, knowing that I couldn't ask questions, but knowing that someone was unwell and just letting things move in secrecy. And I said, oh, we all need help because this is not it. And so just really, once I had that distinguished, I could move through life and say, I know I need help, but also not comparing myself to this person's variation of help. I can still need help too, even though I'm not this deep in it the way that they are. And that was very young, so middle school and before.
It's so powerful. And I reflect on growing up as a childhood preacher. And in addition to my family, really thinking about the people and the community that I was a part of shepherding and leading and supporting. And oftentimes the church was the space where they came for therapy. That's where they came for refuge. And we didn't always recognize it or diagnose it as mental health. But when people were crying out, it's because they were struggling. And you mentioned the word crazy, that stigma and idea, that people who are dealing with and processing their mental health, that they are somehow crazy, has really served as a disadvantage to our communities and set us back in many ways, because then we hide from expressing when we're struggling, and we hide from taking on labels. And that was my introduction. And that was, then for me at that age, I started preaching at 11 years old. And so to journey all of my childhood and early adult life in the church with a responsibility to help uplift those with their backs against the wall. I didn't always know the best way to support them. But what I will say is that I've always felt a sense of obligation to make people feel worthy of dignity and respect, irrespective of your circumstance, right? Knowing that you matter. And regardless of how you're responding or reacting to your circumstances, to let them know that your circumstances do not have control of you. You have control of them. And to empower people to get the support they need, to get the resources they need to get better is just so crucial. And so that was definitely one of my earliest introductions to mental health for sure.
It's good that you said like empower folks to get the resources and the tools they need. And I think that's a good transition. I already stated my lack of exposure to definitely therapists of color. And so what is y'all experience around accessing therapists of color, or what does that field look like?
Yeah, so I'll just a quick story, and I don't know, are you from the South as well?
Yes,
Where?
Texas originally,
Texas? Okay.
and also grew up in Louisiana, so Texas, Louisiana.
So I did my graduate work in Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
Okay, you hear me?
My family is from Mississippi.
No, my God.
Washington County.
Right. So I remember one of the first distinct memories, it was this rural part, this was even like outside of Hattiesburg, Laurel, Mississippi. And one of the first clients I remember come out to the room and she just busted out in joy that I was going to be her therapist,
Yeah.
right? Just seeing that, like she was, and it was actually for her daughter, but she was so excited, right? And that has stayed with me, just the joy that people have
Right.
when they see someone who, even though we may have different backgrounds, right? Different journeys, but that this person's going to get me.
Exactly.
Right. So that has stayed with me, like the importance of having a therapist who understands your cultural background, your upbringing.
Yeah.
That's
You
powerful.
hear me? Yeah.
Yes, right. And so I think that has been, my career has always focused on communities of color. I've worked in schools for the last 17 years. I've worked in juvenile courts. I've worked in hospitals, but working with communities of color, I think early on, I just realized that was going to be it.
Yeah.
Right. That those are, because I knew we didn't have that many.
Yeah.
We're still very underrepresented. Psychologists represent about 3 to 4% of all psychologists. So our numbers are very low. So I think that was really important, knowing that people wanted that we get it, because the alternative is that, and people shared with me very, very heart-wrenching stories of experiencing microaggressions and racism in therapy. So when we come to therapy, we come when things are at a critical moment, usually, and when it takes a long time, but then to have an experience where you're experiencing context of racism in that space, people aren't just they're not gonna say, oh, this person didn't work. They're gonna say therapy doesn't work.
Exactly.
And context matters.
Yes.
Right, context matters. It's like, no, therapy works.
Yes.
But therapy, perhaps with someone who can't relate to anything that you're going through, and be able to help you unpack that stuff accordingly. Yeah, that probably isn't the most effective therapy, for sure.
So we're constantly, I know you use too, Pilar, we're constantly, it's a relationship. So that when there's even if they look like you, it doesn't guarantee that.
That's true.
That's
true.
So even if it doesn't work, that's just that relationship.
Right.
Try another one.
Yes.
Yeah. But people give up on relationships quick.
Like seriously. Yeah, I mean, I just think that representation is vital. It's vital for people's safety. It's vital for people's value. It's vital for people to just feel like they have a home. And so for me, when I think about therapy and the lack of representation, and especially, what Dr. Jackman said about the 3 to 4%, that's so low of us. And that's not just women of color, that's men and women combined. And so that is disheartening, because then there's so many of us and our people that are battling things that they can't get through alone, that, they've tried church, they've tried communal types of healing, they've tried, ancestral healing, they've done all these things. And so then they want to come to therapy, but there's this barrier. And the first barrier, in my opinion, is that I don't see me in therapy. I don't see a person that can look like me. And therefore, why would I go to somebody who won't even understand me? And then, obviously like the financial piece and insurance and all that stuff, that's a different conversation for a different day. But I think that people have to be seen and they have to be heard. And when they're not able to, they run and they keep running in the opposite direction and sometimes never get help. And then they pass that on. We don't get help here. This isn't a safe space anymore. And so then it creates a narrative for a whole body of people that therapy is not the place. And so really trying to work on deconstructing some of the myths and misconceptions about that with therapy by making it colorful and like spaces like this and joining with Dr. Jackman and like having her mentor us to see how to even do that and working together so people can come more.
I want to unpack that a little bit more, this underrepresentation, because it's directly tied to Leadership Writing's mission, particularly around access to graduate level education, because we don't have enough Black and brown therapists, because we don't have enough of them in graduate school to begin with. right?
Right, and we don't because they hear this is in the field, you're not gonna make money.
That's it.
Right, it's not lawyer, engineer,
Exactly,
doctor,
exactly,
right? It's not- So
exactly,
people
yeah.
often have, so I talk to college students and those are some of the messages that they're hearing.
Mhm.
Family,
Mhm.
don't go into this, it doesn't exist, right?
Mhm.
So really having, our communities, and I think it's definitely, I see it changing. That people are seeing, COVID has helped as well, that people are definitely more open to therapy. And so really developing those pipelines, and I can really commend William James, because I know the work that like Dr. Jimmy St. Louis is doing around building those pipelines are really key. The other piece I'd like to unpack is, and I just name it for people, it's like therapy was not made for us.
Right.
That is fact,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You look at who the forefathers of psychology were.
Mhm.
They didn't look like it.
Right.
Right? So there's been a lot of work though that we are doing, clinicians of color, therapists of color, to decolonize therapy,
Yeah.
to bring our voices in, to bring our experiences in, to not
Yeah.
pathologize, to not
Yes.
label our
Exactly.
experience, our lived
Right.
experiences
Right.
as problematic.
Exactly, yeah.
To name the context of
Right.
racism
Yeah.
as a problem.
Context.
Right?
That's always
Yeah.
context.
So no. I think there's a lot of work, there's a whole body of work called liberation psychology that's
Yeah.
really focused on decolonizing therapy and theoretical orientations and bringing our lived experiences in, and not making our experiences deemed as unhealthy,
Right.
but as natural reactions
Yeah.
to this racism.
Yeah, it's so real. And I think about the increased allostatic load that folks take on as they're interacting with
Right.
things every single day,
Yes.
but how racism brings another layer
Yeah.
to that.
Mhm.
And blood pressure is raising, stress levels are
Right.
raising, and you don't oftentimes recognize it
Yeah.
sometimes. You don't realize it.
Mhm.
Maybe there's that day where you're like, feel a little off today.
Right.
But for the most part, even that day that you feel off, you don't realize that that's been building up
Right.
over time.
Right.
Over time.
Or the little
Yeah.
the baby micro that you kind of like
Right.
Exactly.
brush off, but then it becomes a load. Right?
It
After a
does.
while, it's like, I can't, like, you're just waiting for the one person to say
Right.
something.
Right.
And then you're carrying that and you can't do your best work.
Mhm.
You seem paranoid,
Right.
you seem distrustful.
Yes.
But it's in reaction to all the stuff
All
that's
the
happening.
stuff that's going on. Yeah.
I think a lot of that, like everything everyone's been saying is just making me think about how often I'm suppressing stigmas.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be that angry Black woman, but my feelings are hurt.
Right.
too, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? I'm unwell, but in order for me to even be considered for grad school, in
Right.
order for me to be able to consider for this role that I'm
Right.
applying to, I need to show up 10 times harder than
Yes.
the next
Right.
person. So every time I'm feeling something, I'm like, ooh, put it in your pocket.
Put it aside.
Okay?
Right.
Just so you can deliver what you need to. I'm
Right.
at Boston University's Question School of Business. I don't know why. This is and so every day when I'm showing up, I'm like, I see what we're talking about, but
Yeah.
I always want to tie in racial things. I always want to tie in
Yes.
how it's impacting the
Yes.
conversations of the
Yeah.
businesses and the corporations. And like,
Yeah.
what are you thinking about the employees? And
Right.
that's why I appreciate LB so much. How are they partnering with certain schools,
Right.
making sure that those students are supported. So
Yeah.
it's a wraparound.
Yes.
It's everybody's
Yeah.
job,
Yes.
to show up.
It definitely is. And I think about my experience when I went to BU, because I went to BU School of Medicine for my master's in counseling and behavioral medicine. And, I didn't see much of me there at that time. So when I wanted to go pursue a doctorate, I was like, I have to be in a space that I see me, because I can't go through a period of time where I'm accessing my academic success, but I'm shrinking in terms of my identity. And that was so isolating for me. I felt like I actually went through like a depression while I'm trying to help other people get out of theirs. And I was like, this isn't conducive to like my well-being or even my leadership, because it's toxic. It's
So
toxic, in a way that you feel sometimes like you can't, the toxicity has a choke hold on me,
Wow,
a
wow.
stronghold.
Wow.
You know, and so William James for me, you know, was a place where I saw some of me and I was like, I want to go there. I want to go to a place where there's more of me. So then at least, you know, if every class doesn't look like me, I know that when I go to the next one, I could have somebody that I can unpack with, you know, and share my voice, because like our stories are what keeps us going.
Yes, they are.
You know, they're our strength. And like when we can't share them, we become silent. And I think like silence is the perpetuation of violence.
Wow, wow. Say that again.
Silence is the perpetuation of violence.
Yes. You know, I think that's a great transition, you know, even speaking about your experience in grad school, because I was at Tufts. I was the only Black man in my public health program. They are an LB member, so they're working on that diversity. Exactly. Same for Boston University School of Law. They just became a member of Leadership Granary. I went to BU Law and I was one out of 2 Black men coming to my class out of 250 students. I went through such a hard time mentally that I ended up dropping out of law school. You know, I had worked so hard to get to my doctoral program, and it was just so tough. Not only, to your point, Dana, not only, you know, navigating my identity, but then always feeling the pressure to speak up. I knew that there's 3 sections in law school. So there was a section where I'm in, another section where the other young man of color is, and then a section where there's not one Black man in this whole class during their 1 year, where they're talking about the most critical things from civil to contracts to just the fundamentals of criminal to the fundamentals of law. And so it was just a week where I was so depressed. I couldn't sleep. I was just crying. And I'm just like, you know, I go to class every day and it's just so tough. Like all my other classmates, they're just, you know, in study groups. I tried to get some study groups and none of the white boys wanted to study with me. And I'm just like, okay, you know, so this may not be the place that I need to be right now. And I end up leaving. And so, you know, thinking about graduate school, thinking about entrepreneurship when you are trying to build something even for yourself, how do you really get through and prioritize your mental health?
Ooh, such great questions. So, you know, I think my graduate school experience, I was fortunate. I realize I'm a person who likes to create community, particularly if it's not there. So I remember in my cohort, we had 5 different types of, so there's counseling, clinical, that's only know that. But there were a couple women who were in the different program. We were all one of only in our programs, but there are about 3 or 4 of us. And so I definitely built community with them. I remember we started this multicultural council. So there were ways in which I connected. I also connected to our American Psych Association. They had a graduate student program of ethnic minority graduate students. So I had to find community in that way. But it was definitely tough. And I was lucky to have an advisor who looked out for me. So I think that makes a big difference. In entrepreneurship, it's hard because you think about, you know, I'm building this company, I'm trying to think about where funding is going to come from. And I see these stats, 0.6% of women in color get VC funding, but 0.6, like we don't get 8%, right? You know, so it's like, is this going to work? So there are definitely times where I feel discouraged, but community is always about. So I wish I had LB all throughout, but it's really like building that community and finding voices and faces that encourage me. I remember having an experience recently with someone who was assigned to me as a mentor. And there were these things that they were saying, it's like, I was reflecting, like, I know you mean well, but it's not helping me. It's actually discouraging me. And so then there was this Black man who's also a similar space. And I'd have the similar conversation and then feel uplifted. I'm like, you know what? I'm like, I told him I don't need that person. Like, I'd be crying. I'm meetings. I'm like, I don't want to feel this discouraged. Right? So it's important to know like if somebody is for you or not. And if they're not, they need to move up.
Right.
They need to be done because they can really discourage you and prevent you from getting in front of your goals.
Yeah.
But that community is really important.
Yeah.
So building community, creating community. If it doesn't exist, find it. But we have LV here. So
Yeah.
Yes.
tapping into this
Tap
space.
in,
Yes.
get
Yeah.
connected, and certainly, I'm over here reflecting on innovation and leadership.
Yeah.
And what roles do they play
Yeah.
in driving us forward? You're an entrepreneur as well as you. So how have you leveraged innovation
Yeah.
to solve these problems?
Yes.
Because that's what innovation
Right.
begs upon us,
Yes.
is to figure out solutions to our most pressing issues.
Yeah.
So let's unpack entrepreneurship and innovation a bit.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love talking about innovation because I like to create, and I think that creation is just like a branch of the creator. And so when I really first built Empower Our Commons, because I really needed a space to create and to breathe and to be myself and to be around other people who are like me and kind of in this like-minded vision to just have wellness, have leadership, have like world-changing capabilities and be Black and beautiful.
Exactly.
That was like, I'm gonna do that. And it's like, so what does that look like to bridge the gap between mental health and leadership? That's very different, but that's my mission.
Exactly.
And so I had to create and really create spaces of where that looks like. So having leadership workshops that are focused on mental health. Okay, this is how you become a leader, by talking about your mental health. You have to be well so you can do well, and so thinking about that, for me, it's like you are your authentic self. And so if you're your authentic self and you want to strive for, greater things, then you're able to extend that greatness with others, because it takes a village to be great. And it takes us being our individual creativity, I guess, and one to build and to grow and to sustain. So I take innovation really seriously. And it's not just about me, it's about the community that I'm serving. How can we create together very flavorfully?
Yeah. And you fly, let me tell you. You gotta look well to do well too. Look, no, literally, I think it is a part of our mental health process, how we show up in the world, present ourselves, innovation.
Yeah, again, as I thought about, it's funny, when in college, I double majored in business and psychology because I knew I wanted to have a business afterwards. The process of graduate school totally extinguished my entrepreneurship drive. Totally. Do you hear me? Totally. I came out, I was like, I don't want to have a private practice. I don't want to do this. It's going to be too much. And because they never focused on it. There were no classes around building a business, using your skills, which I'm like, such a disservice. So I had to tap back into my entrepreneurship drive again afterwards. And it was connecting with some early career psychologists who were actually white, who had their businesses. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll do this. Right. And they were generous in sharing that. So I'm like, all right. So I was like, okay, it's not that hard. I can do this. And so that kind of took off. I started with having a private practice. But then as I was getting older, moving up in my career, I'm like, I needed to find strategies for not having to be on for every dollar that I was making. So thinking about what are passive incomes, what are ways to also expand what I know. And it was really in this movement of really thinking about how do I help people of color own and think about their own healing in a different way. And so I've come to this place where it's like healing is not a luxury, right? Because we always say healing is not a luxury, it's actually a necessity.
Right.
And so how do I give communities of color the tools to make that healing a necessity? And so it started with a Therapist of Color directory. I was actually thinking about, because this was a few years ago, I was actually thinking about a co-working space for mental health therapists, because none of that existed. So I was just going through different things. And then I was going through my own process where I was looking for a therapist of color. my husband and I were struggling, and we wanted a couples therapist, we wanted individual therapists, and we couldn't find it. It was really hard. And so I was like, you know what, I can do this. This is something that is really easy to get into. So that's the work. Starting with that, I also, again, I'm always creating opportunities if things aren't out there. So I also started these conversations with therapists about thinking about how are they decolonizing their own work, right? So those are community conversations we would do. And so, now I'm at this place where, okay, so the directory is there, but what is the other impact? And it's really about, as you've talked about your experience in grad school, but people are having the similar experiences in their workplaces, right? Where they're not able to thrive, they're not getting promoted, or the day-to-day microaggressions, the emotional labor of this context is really weighing them down. And so my mission is to really be direct. I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna work, it's a little too direct. But it's really about addressing racial trauma and racial stress in the workplace. And how are companies naming that and willing to take an honest look at that and get the tools to support their employees.
That's powerful. And Dr. Jackman, you brought us a gift today.
Yeah, I did. I'm like, Oprah, I'm channeling my
I love it. So, okay, I feel thriving in here. Can you tell us what's in here and explain it for the people who got it?
So this is a card deck that I created during COVID.
Amazing.
My time to thrive. And there's some cards that really focus, again, thinking about that healing journey, like we all need to be on this healing journey, right? We all need to build the tools to heal. And so these are based on mindfulness strategies, their prompts, their quotes, their activities that you can do to promote healing. So I thought it'd be nice.
This is amazing.
Right in the green room.
Exactly.
And you're covering song, spirituality,
So there's 10 categories. So there are 10 categories that are based on, I started with how do we heal in general? So music, spirituality, and solidarity. Those are the top 3 things that research shows people of color use to connect and to heal. So I wanted to tap in on those. And then exercise, I'm just saying my kids all have S names as well.
I love it.
So trust me, it took a while to come with all 10 things. But these are all things that we can do to support emotional and mental well-being.
I love it. My time to thrive.
My time to thrive.
Yes.
Okay, so where can people go to learn more?
So our website, innosight.com, and we have lots of resources. We have our shop, where we have shirts like this.
I appreciate this.
Yes.
This is powerful.
The directory, so there are lots of tools, it's like a one-stop shop, you go there, you get lots, we have a blog, so lots of things that we, again, really promoting that message.
That's beautiful. Congratulations on this. This is extraordinary. So everyone go to innosight.com and you can learn more. They can purchase the cards there as well. And thank you for these amazing pens. I've already kind of played with it. This is a good pen. I love good pens. That good ink. That's so amazing.
Just say what an honor and a pleasure it is to know that y'all are here in Boston.
Yes.
So there is just such a reputation that's held for people of color in this city. And to know that if I didn't live here and I was looking for help, I would be Googling and y'all name would come up. And that is truly more than we could ask for. And just thank you for spending this time with us today. It's our inaugural conversation. You set the tone. All this joy every single time.
It's so amazing. It's so amazing.
Yeah, so how about we wrap up with one key takeaway? All right.
Oh boy.
So it could even be something that we already discussed, something that really resonated with us. So I'll say that something we always talk about at Leadership Writer is to be your authentic self. And that's something that you touched on. It's so key. It's so important that we just navigate life knowing that we can be ourselves, and when we don't feel ourselves, we probably need to go visit a therapist and see how can I really tap back into that. So that's one thing that I really took away from this conversation. And I'll share after we get off, why I'm even really honing in there today.
That's all right.
Yes.
I think my key takeaway is there's so much taking place here in the city. And I think this space for existing because it just doesn't anywhere else. And this is such a piloting, such a niche. And thank you for your support. And so my takeaway is there is community if you seek it.
Yeah.
You know?
There's
So I thank y'all for joining us.
I would say, again, thank you for having this conversation. Give me a mic and I can talk about mental health all day, every day. So thank you for elevating this conversation. I think the thing that I would say we didn't really get into is that, you know, therapy, when people think about therapy, they have kind of a singular, like you're in an office and you're meeting with someone. And I'd like to expand that. So talk therapy is one aspect, but there are a lot of other body-based therapies and expressive therapies. So really encourage people to find something that's going to work for you and not feel locked in that you only have to do it in a certain way. But we all could benefit from meeting with a therapist, and I'm on this mission to think about, you know, we get our annual physicals. Let's also get an annual emotional. So I don't know what we're gonna call it. Let's just check in and how am I doing? And it doesn't have to mean you're going to therapist because something is wrong. Right. It could, you know, there are a range of reasons that why you can go to see a therapist. And some of it's just for your personal growth. Just to check in. How am I doing? The thing's good. Am I good? You know, so really trying to expand that idea of what therapy is and what it can be.
It's like self-support. So
Would
it's like,
you, I'm sorry.
no, so we said healing is not a luxury, but a necessity. So self-support
Self-support,
is not a luxury, but a necessity.
You hear me? And so would you say that that even with therapy, that a good sign and a good path to be on is to be in therapy even when things are going well?
Absolutely.
That's powerful. Well, I think for me, a great takeaway is something I tell people all the time, that leaders and individuals who are concerned with social transformation must take care of themselves. And they must do so by developing self-awareness, social awareness, and spiritual awareness. And that the balance of the three really allows us to navigate at the intersections of life. When we're being hit from every single direction and angle, having the balance of both self-awareness, social awareness, and spiritual awareness. Self-awareness, who am I? Social awareness, who am I in relation to others? Who are we?
Context.
Spiritual awareness, you know, what's my soul? Who's my soul? What energies am I taking in and giving out? That's the balance of the three.
I love those three. I love
Thank
them.
you.
I would definitely just piggyback off of what everybody said, but I feel like we have to heal from the root so our flowers can bloom. And many times we avoid healing from the root because it's difficult and it's hard to touch on things like racism or just pain, trauma, addiction. Like there's so many things that I think we go through as a collective and individually that we don't want to touch because it's hard to, but when we heal from the root, we truly get to water that every day and we will bloom. And so I would say just do the work, even when it's hard, find your community and your tribe, get your spirit right and together and a garden will come.
Keep going, my friends. Don't give up. Hang in there. It's so key. This is incredible.
Thank you.
Wonderful conversation. So how can our audience keep up with you all?
I can go. So you can follow me on both my pages at I am Pilar Tucker on Instagram and at Empower Our Crown. We have a website for Empower Our Crown, www.empowerourcrown.org. You all can follow me on LinkedIn, Pilar Tucker. I have lots of different avenues where I can be found. So find me, I will follow you back. And thank you again. Leadership Granary, I love you all. I appreciate you so much.
And congratulations on your journey. You have 2 more years. And then we're gonna be saying Dr. Tucker.
Yeah.
I look forward to
And
that.
I would just say, I follow Buar in the videos, the inspiration, I love it. So thank you so much.
Sure.
So you will not regret following all of those pages.
So amazing.
Charmaine, what about you?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn, it's Charmaine Jackman. I have our business page is InnoPsych, like innovative, psych, like psychology, PSYCH. I know I have trouble spelling it sometimes. But we're on there on Twitter, Facebook, InnoPsych MA. Instagram is really where we do a lot of our visibility. And also, you can also find it Ask Dr. Charmaine on all those typical platforms as well. So yeah, definitely connect, and we are looking forward to continue to grow.
Yeah.
And also, because of the work we're doing for organizations, reach out and bring us to your workplace.
Yes.
If you're a DI person, your benefits, HR.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We want to connect with you at work as well. So, thank you.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. All right, so make sure you follow the two of them and don't forget to follow Leadership Brainery. So we are a Leadership Brainery on all platforms. We even have a TikTok now.
Okay. Do you hear me?
So, it may not have that many posts now, but it will. So you want to follow now.
You better get in.
All right, so we are wrapping up. Anything else, team, that we want to share with the folks?
Hey, be well, keep going, take care of yourselves. Much love, and until next time, do you hear me?
Yeah.